समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉप अप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
क्या? समझ में नहीं आया।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉपअप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
अब समझा।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme related documents carefully.
Basic issue is that in the Islamic system and Islamic tradition, there is the tradition of waqf. So waqf in fact simply means, it can mean to restrict, it can mean to end, it can mean restrict and devotion, which means something that you give away to waqf is ceases to exist as anybody else's property or belonging, and it is given to devotion. In fact, to understand this, there is a very good 1.5 minute video that I found on the Waqf Foundation or Waqf Foundation of United Kingdom. So I will share a link with you. Watch that. That is the clearest definition. What it also does is that anything that you give away is gone forever. You can never claim it back. Plus, the spirit of this giving is such that what you've given should be like a perpetual charity, because you can't take it, someone else can't take it. So this should continue to serve the purpose for which it was given. So waqf is like a perpetual donation. You've given it, it's forever, and it will keep on yielding income for the purpose for which it was meant. So in Arabic, the concept is sadqa jariya, which means like continuing charity or an ever-flowing charity. In fact, there are many references to charity in the Holy Quran, but there is one in particular of which I will give you a short truncated translation, which says, when a man dies, only 3 deeds will survive him. 1, continuing alms, that is charity. 2, profitable knowledge, the knowledge that he created, that will survive him and will be of benefit to future generations. And 3, a child who prays for him. So those are the 3 things that matter. Charity has been put as first of the 3. This goes to the Waqf, the organization, and the controller is a mutawalli. Mutawalli is like the custodian who looks after your donation and makes sure that your donation is used for the right purposes. And then to manage it in perpetuity, there are Waqf organizations. That is the tradition. How old the tradition is? Amit Shah, in his speech, in his very impressive speech, in fact, there were many impressive speeches. You can hear Amit Shah. I will share some links with you. You can hear Amit Shah and Kiran Rijiju on the side of the government backing the law. You can also watch Asaduddin Owaisi, who's actually delivered a very impassioned speech, at the end of which he said, I'm tearing off this law, just as Gandhi had torn away the racist law in South Africa. So just as Gandhi said, I reject that law, I am saying that I reject this law. So I will share that with you. Also Manoj Jha of RJD and some of the others opposing the bill as well. So you will see those links and you can make up your own mind. Going back to Amit Shah's speech, he said that this tradition of Waqf, in fact, he got his reading of Islamic history right. He said that this goes back to Caliph Omar's times. Caliph Omar was the second Rashidun Caliph. He was a contemporary of Prophet Muhammad. In fact, a little bit younger than Prophet Muhammad. Prophet Muhammad was born in 570 AD. Caliph Omar was born in 584 AD. Initially, he was in argument with Prophet Muhammad, and then he became Muslim. It is he in whose times this tradition of Waqf began. And the tradition is drawn from the hadiths or the hadiths. Now, hadiths are not part of the Quran. Hadiths are stories. Literally, it means the stories, happenings, which are verbally, mostly orally recounted by one generation to the other. Then over time, they are studied by scholars. These have then been qualified as good, not okay, and bad. And then later, these have been codified as laying down the Sharia law. So this is the next most important source of Islamic theology or Islamic practice after the Holy Quran. So Amit Shah said correctly that the Waqf tradition or the Waqf tradition, Waqf is like plural for Waqf, that goes back to the era of the second Caliph, second Rashidun Caliph, Caliph Umar. He's got that right. Then he also says correctly that in India this tradition came in the Ghorid times, that is in Muhammad Ghori's time or thereabouts. And since then it continued. And then he says that once we came to the 19th century, initially there was an 1863 British era act, which was the Religious Endowments Act, that governed all the religious endowments in India just six years after 1857 and 6 years after the crown taking over the rule of India. Then he says after that in 1890, a new law came in, that was the Charitable Properties Act. Again, it covered all properties. 1913, however, a specific law was made for Waqf properties. And then that law evolved. In 1937, the law codifying the Sharia Act, that was passed. And then in 1954, under Nehru, again the Waqf Act was passed, which was further amended in 1995. 1995 was effectively a new law. Now you have to go back to 1995 and understand what period that was. That was the period Narasimha Rao was in power. That is when Muslims were very angry after the destruction of the Babri Masjid. And Narasimha Rao's government did many things to assuage them. It was in that period that a new Waqf Act was also passed. There was some compulsion to do so because over time the Waqf properties had gone into disrepair, many had been encroached. This is something that Indira Gandhi had written about in a letter to chief ministers on 26th March 1976. In fact, you can see that letter on your screens. I found that letter in the Sachar Committee report. Remember, UPA had set up a Sachar Committee, Justice Sachar Committee, to look at to examine the conditions of Muslims in India. So she also said that, look, too much of it has been encroached and a lot of these properties, Waqf properties, are where government buildings and installations are sitting. Now you can't demolish those buildings and hand these lands back. So at least start giving a reasonable rent for these. And if you face the limitations of Rent Control Act, now it's very difficult for me to explain in 2 sentences to current generation, most of our viewers, what Rent Control Act was, except to say that there was an era in the license quota Raj when even rents were fixed by the state, right? That led to so many shortages and other mess, and ultimately so much of the disaster in our cities. But that is something that we'll talk about later. In that letter, she says that where possible, please relax the Rent Control Act so the Waqf bodies can get more rent for these properties. Purpose of the Waqf was actually to use these properties or use these assets. It can be property, it can be jewelry, it can be cash, it can even be a car. Anybody can donate anything to Waqf. The purpose of a Waqf institution is to use it for charity, the purpose for which it is meant. However, to cut the long story short, the 1995 law gave some very sweeping powers to the Waqf bodies. This was the 1995 law, not the earlier law. Those powers then got further strengthened and actually made very strong in 2013. 2013, in the last months of the UPA government, they carried out another bunch of amendments in the 1995 law. And Amit Shah said, I'm giving you his explanation first, that but for those amendments, it would not have been necessary to bring out this particular law. Now, what these 2013 amendments read with the 1995 Waqf Act, what they said was they actually gave total power to Waqf boards or Waqf bodies to declare any property as Waqf property. So, notionally, anybody could say that the house where I live and where I am recording this from, this is a Waqf property. That was the intent, and that was the outcome of those sections. So there was section 40 of that law read with, say, section 6. If you read section 40 with section 6, one empowered the Waqf board to declare any property as Waqf property. Then if I got aggrieved that this is my house, how can you call it Waqf property? Where would I go in appeal? I would go in appeal to the Waqf tribunal. That Waqf tribunal's decision was then final. It was then final, and I would not be able to challenge it in a civil court. I can still challenge it legally, but it will be challenged under the writ jurisdiction. So I'll have to file a writ against this, and writs have limitations. Writs don't apply everywhere. I have to go to the High Court right away. So that became a final court of appeal. So first, the Waqf board said, the earlier Waqf board or the existing Waqf board, that this is not your home, this is our Waqf property. Then I went in appeal to a tribunal. Tribunal said, no, you are wrong. This is actually Waqf property. Then if I still contested it, I had to go in a writ petition to a high court, which was quite onerous. The other thing with this was that all members of the Waqf board and the Waqf tribunal had to be Muslim. So in a way, and that is the BJP's argument, these amendments gave this tribunal and Waqf board jurisdiction also over non-Muslims, which they wanted to rectify now, besides also making these bodies judicially accountable. So anybody aggrieved could also seek judicial accountability or a judicial review of the situation. So a judge could then decide who's right, who's wrong, whose property it is. This other thing is this statute of limitations. The Waqf boards or the Waqf law as it existed earlier, on then the Limitation Act of 1963 did not apply. What is the Limitation Act of 1963? That is, if you have a civil dispute, say, on a property, you can go and address it. You can seek redressal in a court of law within 12 years. If you haven't done it for 12 years, too bad. See you later, or maybe not see you later. You've lost your case. But there's a 12-year limitation. You have to do it within 12 years. Under the Waqf law, for Waqf boards, there was no such limitation. They could make these claims without any time limit, 12 years, 24 years, 36 years, whatever number of years. However, the aggrieved party had to protest or file their protest within 1 year. So there were limitation on one side and a very severe limitation on one side and no limitation on the other side. What's happened under the current law? I'm trying to make it as succinct as possible, and if I fail, please forgive me, because it's a very complex thing and I know that you don't have forever, particularly if you've been reading about these debates and also watching these debates, because these debates have had a lot of airtime and a lot of audiences. A lot of the audiences have been glued to television, also because it was such good parliamentary craft. It was such a healthy debate in a very good parliamentary environment. What does the new law do? The new law says there will be Waqf boards and Waqf councils, both of which will be fully peopled by Muslims, right? Now, the doubters or those who are concerned, particularly on the Muslim side, they said that, look, you will pack these with Hindus, Christians, all the others. So Muslims will lose their freedom under Article 14, 25, 26, ABC, etc., to conduct their own religious affairs. So you are taking that constitutional freedom away from the Muslims. Government says, look, the Waqf organization, the Waqf itself, right? The Mutawalli and the Waqif. Waqif is the person who donates to Waqf. All of them are Muslim. They will never be a non-Muslim with any of this. However, I'm giving you both arguments. If you listen to Owaisi, he says this is nonsense. You want to pack these with non-Muslims, so you take away my freedoms under Article 14, 15, 25, 26, and so on and so forth. The government argument, which Amit Shah puts out, is that, look, Mutawalli who's the custodian of this property or its donation is also a Muslim. Then Waqf itself that manages this is also consisting of all Muslims. However, Waqf board and the Waqf council, the new Waqf board which will be set up at the state level now, and the Waqf council which will be central, those will have some non-Muslims. So say about 2 non-Muslims. However, the majority will be Muslim. The law says that even the chief executive of these boards and the central council can be a non-Muslim. Now, to which the argument from the Muslim side and the opposition side, let me not just say the Muslim side, the argument is that how can you put non-Muslims into these bodies, because ultimately these bodies would be adjudicating on a traditional Muslim practice and traditional Muslim charities. To which the government's reply from Amit Shah, again, that is the most succinct government reply, that is that look, don't you have trusts? You can have a Jain trust, a Hindu trust, a Sikh trust, any such trust. All those trusts fully consist of people of that faith. They can be a Parsi trust. So in that trust, there will be only Parsis. However, every state has a charities commissioner. Charities commissioner then oversees all the trusts, that their activities are all right, their accounts are all right, there is no corruption, there is no wastage, that they are all sticking to their purpose of their charter of objectives, etc. And he says, has anybody ever said that your charities commissioner can only be Hindu or can only be Muslim or can only be Sikh? And if you take it forward, what will happen? I'm giving you arguments. And he says, if you take it forward, what will happen? That means if you have a Muslim charities commissioner, that charities commissioner cannot look at Hindu charities, and vice versa, and so on. So it sounds a bit rhetorical in the way that he's put it, but this is the argument. Obviously, the other side is not convinced, because the other side is not convinced of the intentions of the government. Under the new law, even if you see Mrs. Gandhi's letter and also a chapter on Waqf issues in Shekhar committee report, that is page 238 in Shekhar committee report, that chapter also talks about the fact that the Waqf properties have not been looked after very well. Many have been lost, many have been encroached upon, and many have been sold illegally or have been rented at throwaway prices. And Shekhar committee also reports at that period that even in terms of book value, which will be a fraction of the real value at that point, just the properties owned by the Waqf in Delhi was then worth 6,000 crores, and their income was just 163 crores, which is 2.7%. But again, 2.7% only on the book value. Out of that, 7% the Waqf board can keep for its own upkeep, its salaries, etc., etc. Rest has to be spent on charity, on the purpose for which these lands were donated. That is too little. So there is need to free up these properties so more money can be raised from these. These can be monetized a lot better. So the purpose of charity is served that much better. So what has changed now? Number one, the Waqf itself will function like a trust. That will have only Muslims. They will be a body overseeing within the Waqf system. These Waqfs members there also, in that council also, will be all Muslims. This, however, will be further overseen by a state level Waqf board, in which there can be 2 non-Muslim members. Majority will be Muslim. The chief executive can be a non-Muslim. Their amendments came in, and some members, particularly BJP allies, wanted to raise the level of the officers who will be members of this body. And also the law now says this body will also have 2 women and people from Bori and other communities who are usually not observant of Islamic practices in the same way that traditional, say, Sunni Muslims are. So Shias, Boris, and some more will be given representation in that body at the top. That is not the body managing the Waqf property on the ground. And the decisions of all these bodies will then be exposed to judicial oversight. So it's not as if This will be one divine body whose order will be final. You will be able to challenge it judicially in a civil court. That is the big change. Then there will be a survey. There will be a nationwide survey of all Waqf properties. This was also meant to be done under the earlier law, but was never done in reality. Now, the original draft of the law said that the collector or the deputy commissioner will carry out these surveys, but with an amendment again coming in from a TDP member, it's now been decided that this will be a designated officer, higher, more senior to the deputy commissioner. Then the question of can a property become a Waqf property by use? Now listen to this carefully. What do you mean by use? A mosque may be standing on a piece of land for 100 years, right? But there may not be documentation that that land was given by somebody in donation to Waqf. Then what happens? So by use under the existing law, by use you said, look, since I've been sitting on this land, this mosque is there. The example that's been mentioned often is a mosque that stands right in front of Parliament House. That mosque conforms to this description. In fact, one of the objections from the BJP side is that after the 2013 amendments, 123 properties in Lutyens, Delhi were handed over to the Waqf board, and these were all very highly valuable properties, including properties of Northern Railway. I presume this mosque is among them as well. Now, can you then get ownership of Waqf property by use? That is again something that has been made arguable. A challenge to this has been made arguable under the new law, and again an important change is that only a Muslim can make a Waqf donation. A non-Muslim, that wasn't the case earlier, a non-Muslim cannot make a Waqf donation. And even if a Muslim or maybe a new convert makes a Waqf donation, that Muslim has to have been in the Muslim faith for at least 5 years. Now, who will certify that? How will you find evidence that somebody has been Muslim for 5 years but not 5 months or 5 days, right? That's the question that Owaisi also raised, that how will you determine when somebody became a Muslim? By checking their beard, or by, as Andy says, quoting obviously Narendra Modi from an earlier Jharkhand election campaign, या उनके कपड़े देख के आप बताएंगे कि वो कब मुसलमान बना? These are questions that the opposition is raising, and that's got the Muslim side really feeling insecure, because they think that this is an encroachment into what was so far entirely their domain, which they handled within their faith and within the institutions of their faith. So in that now, the government has been brought in. The government is now right there. The argument from the government side would be that, look, so many Hindu temples have been taken over by the government, and those are being run by endowments controlled by the government and managed by chief executives who are government bureaucrats. Then the opposition would say, in that case, why don't you allow Muslims to be on the boards of Tirupati or Muslims to be on the board of Hindu temples, right? Again, the counter argument will come that, look, the charity commissioner or the secretary in the state who's in charge of all endowments can be of any faith. And that's the distinction we are now creating. We are creating multiple levels of the management of Waqf properties. There have been many dramatic cases. Somebody lays claims to a big temple, right? Somebody in Gujarat laid claims to the municipal corporation building, claiming that this is where, in the Mughal era, Muslim pilgrims going for Hajj used to rest. It was a sarai where they used to rest. So these kind of claims based on history can be made because there was no law of limitations. Similarly, in Gujarat, somebody made claims to the 2 islands of Bet Dwarka. This reached the High Court of Gujarat, and High Court of Gujarat was so astounded they refused to admit this, and they said, how can you claim Waqf rights in what is actually Krishna Nagri? Right? So all these issues were coming up because there was no statute of limitations. This also fueled public opinion on the Hindu side, that this law was being misused, that this was appeasement, and this was a special dispensation only for one community. There are many cases in Kerala in which the church is involved, in Tamil Nadu where temples are involved. In Tamil Nadu, also a case where a farmer could not sell his land because it was then said, the Waqf board went and claimed that the entire village had been donated to Waqf by the Nawab of that era, more than 100 years ago. Now, those issues are also the reality of this subcontinent. All of these will not end, but all of these will also keep feeding into the politics. Now, I also know that you keep hearing astounding figures of how much land Waqf has and how much land the others have. So, one fact is correct that after defense and railways, Waqf boards in India have the largest amount of land. So formally, I'm giving you data that's formally available. Ministry of Defense, according to a 2022 report, had 17.99 lakh acres, 18 lakh acres. Railways had 12 lakh acres. However, Amit Shah claimed that between 1913, when the first Waqf Act came in, and 2013, when the amendments by UPA took place, Waqf properties had become 18 lakh acres, whereas after the amendments of 2013, because sweeping powers were given to Waqf boards to say this is Waqf, that is Waqf, in these 10 and a half years or 11 years, that number has gone up to 39 lakh acres. That's what he claimed in his speech. So he said in 100 years, you got 18 lakh acres. In these 11 years, you've added 21 lakh acres. Now, whatever the reality, the fact is that this has all fed into a very divided public opinion. And it's in that situation that this new law has come. So once again, I've tried to explain it. However, I know I cannot convince anybody either on this side or that side. So all I've done is classical cut the clutter. I've tried to simplify the issues for you as much as possible.